I'm Brandi Kruse, and this is Politics Unpacked. Politics Unpacked is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42, making Washington a place for all to prosper. Sign up for their newsletter at future42.org. Welcome to Politics Unpacked. For week 12 of the legislative session, we have to focus 100% of our time and energy for the next 10 minutes talking about what's happening with the state's budget. So let me get you caught up. We started the session with a $14 billion budget deficit. Democrats made clear pretty early on, even before the session began, that they wanted to compensate for that with a lot of new taxes, including a tax on wealth, business taxes, and even increasing the property tax for Washingtonians. Republicans were pretty clear early on that they thought that the budget could be balanced without new taxes. Of course, Democrats are in the majority, so what Democrats want to do goes. Now, Bob Ferguson, during his inaugural address when he was first sworn in, made it clear to his fellow Democrats that he wasn't so eager to rely solely on new taxes.
We should have an open and honest dialogue about how we arrived at this shortfall and what lessons we must learn. Let us work together to ensure that we correct some of the actions that brought us here. But let me start by saying that the era of assuming unrealistic growth in revenue is over. To be specific, I will not sign a budget that requires unrealistic revenue growth to balance. Moreover, I will veto policy bills that defer major spending obligations more than 4 years after the legislation is adopted. These bills violate the spirit of Washington's requirement that state budgets be balanced over a 4-year period.
So that brings us to this week. The House and the Senate passed versions of their budget along party lines. So basically, the budget that Democrats wanted was passed in the House, and the budget that Democrats wanted was passed in the Senate. The two versions of the budget are different, but they have a lot of similarities, particularly when it comes to taxes. So both budgets rely on increases to the property tax, a wealth tax, a business and occupation tax increase, and expanding Seattle's payroll tax across the entire state, which adds an additional tax to companies that have high earners on the payroll. So just a couple days after both chambers passed their version of the budget, Bob Ferguson, the governor, came out and had a press conference and said he will not sign either of them.
For two key reasons. First, they each propose far too much in taxes. Second, they both rely on a wealth tax, which is novel, untested, difficult to implement, and most importantly, for purposes of adopting a sustainable budget, will face an immediate challenge in court.
So for Democrats, it's really back to the drawing table because they cannot pass budgets that balance based on the wealth tax, which they were relying pretty heavily on to be able to make the numbers work. So that really leaves us with a few key taxes still on the table: the payroll tax, the B&O tax increase, and also the property tax increase, which would change how much your local government could increase your property taxes in any given year without going to a vote of the people. Right now, it's capped at 1%. But if Democrats pass the property tax increase plan, it would tie your property tax increases to the rate of inflation and population growth. 43,000 people registered opposed to that idea for a committee hearing in Senate Ways and Means.
We live in Vancouver, Washington, and we are retired. And we're living in the house that we raised our children in. And we've lived here for more than 45 years. As the taxes have gone up a lot on us because of this housing values going up. And we're relying on our current limited income and its fixed income. So we're worried that if we suddenly find that our property taxes are going up 4% a year instead of 1% a year, 4% a year for 10 years is 40%. We have a fixed income and we won't be able to afford that. We'll be taxed out of our house and we'll have to sell it. We think that's unfair, and we urge that you vote against this tax.
Republican State Senator Kruse is on the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and it was a little bit performative, but he thought it was important for the other side to see visually just how many Washingtonians did not support the tax proposal.
One of the things that I've noticed about this particular bill is the large amount of input that we've received from the public, and I've got here a list of all of the people who have signed in against this particular bill, and I'm just curious, I see 43,153 people who have signed in against it, which is about 95%. Have we ever seen anything of this magnitude before?
I don't believe so. If I recall, there is a bill 1163 from this year related to firearms that had about 8,200 or 8,300 signed in opposition.
So the real question is, what are Democrats going to do from here? House Speaker Lori Jenkins said this week there will be new taxes, so they're not taking all of them off the table. So which ones are they going to get rid of? Which ones are they going to keep? For its part, the business community is pushing back really hard against that B&O tax increase and the payroll tax. 60 of the state's largest employers sent a letter to the 4 leaders of the legislature asking them to reconsider. The letter said, in part, "We are writing to urge you to review and revise the recently proposed tax and budget proposals before enacting them into law this year. We appreciate your public service and the difficult problems that you are grappling to address. But if approved, these proposals would result in the largest tax increase in state history, perpetuating a dangerous trend of unsustainable spending growth." They went on to say they were encouraged by Governor Ferguson's announcement that he would not sign the proposed wealth tax, and that he said that we can't simply tax our way out of the budget deficit that we're in. They said given national economic trends, Washington state cannot sustain continued tax and spending increases and simultaneously maintain our economic resilience and competitiveness. Now, which of the remaining taxes would Bob Ferguson support? At his press conference this week, reporters asked him that repeatedly because the only one he really took off the table was the wealth tax. And just like he had previously, he declined to commit to any position on the remaining taxes.
Are you entertaining the idea of a 5% payroll tax?
What I'm going to do is have a conversation with both caucuses.
Both budgets are dependent on revenue from the payroll tax. You're pretty clear on one, but so why are you not taking a more clear position?
Because I'm starting with the wealth tax.
Whether you support it,
Yeah.
maybe not the amount, but you support the tax and you
Appreciate the follow-up. My answer is still the same, but thanks for the question.
Where does your support stand for increasing the cap on property taxes?
I appreciate all the questions on different revenue sources. I'm just not going to engage in those, so I appreciate that.
So all of that to say, TBD, there's still a lot to be figured out with the state budget, and there are only weeks left in the legislative session to do that work. That has been Politics Unpacked for this 12th week of the legislative session. I'm Brandi Kruse. Have a fantastic weekend. Politics Unpacked is brought to you by Future 42, making Washington a place for all to prosper. Sign up for their newsletter at future42.org. And in the meantime, join us 4 days a week for our live show, Undivided, where we give context and have important conversations about what's happening in Washington state and beyond. undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com.